Good morning. I'm Debbie Hersman. I'm chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. I'm joined today by Mr. John DeLisi, who's the director of our Office of Aviation Safety, and Dr. Joseph Cawley, who's the director of our Office of Research and Engineering. Their teams are doing the work to get to the bottom of this event. This morning, I'm going to provide an update on the NTSB's investigation into the Japan Airlines Boeing 787 that experienced a battery fire 1 month ago today at Boston's Logan International Airport. Our investigators have been working around the clock to determine what happened and why. Air travel is remarkably safe. About 2 million people, the population of the city of Houston, travel on U.S. airlines safely every day. The aviation community has achieved this remarkable record in large part through redundancy and layers of defense, as well as through checks and cross-checks. Our task now is to see if appropriate layers of defense and checks were built into the design, certification, and manufacturing processes. Before I go into detail, let me provide just a little bit of background on the investigation so far. You'll see in the photo of the 787 an image of the batteries and where they're located. The lithium-ion batteries on the 787 are manufactured by GS Yuasa for the Thales electrical installation. They are unique to the 787. This same battery model is used for the primary airplane battery and for the auxiliary power unit, or APU. There's two batteries, the main battery and the APU start battery. The 787 battery that is pictured here is powered by 8 individual cells of about 4 volts each that brings the total voltage of the battery to 32 volts, about 32 volts. The main battery is used in flight to provide power when all other power sources fail. The event battery is used to start the APU. If the battery fails, the APU will not start, and if the APU is running at the time of a battery failure, it will shut down. During our last press briefing on January 24th, 2 weeks ago, I announced that we determined 3 things. 1, that the battery had caught fire. 2, that we also found that there was an uncontrolled chemical reaction at high temperatures in cells of the battery, or a thermal runaway. And we found electrical short circuiting in some of the cells. Since that time, there have been 2 tracks that our investigation has been focused on. First, investigators have been working to find the origin of the fire and what caused it. Second, investigators have been reviewing battery certification documentation and testing. So let me start by talking about the NTSB lab and what we've been doing. Our investigators have completed disassembly of the battery, and they are wrapping up microscopic examinations of the battery, of the cells, and their windings. Our review of the flight data recorder data shows that the voltage of the battery had unexpectedly dropped from a full charge of approximately 32 volts to approximately 28 volts. This drop is consistent with the charge voltage of a single cell. Based upon findings from the examinations and identifying thermal and mechanical damage, we believe that the evidence points to a single cell as the initiating event. Let me give a few examples of this evidence. This photo shows a top view of the JAL battery. You can see 8 individual cells. While the entire battery suffered damage, it is clear that the left side of the battery exhibits the most thermal damage in cells 5 through 8. The charring that you see circled in the photo shows remnants of plastic insulating materials. This material charred when temperatures exceeded 500 degrees Fahrenheit. These photos show the side view of the same battery. As you can see, again, greater damage was sustained by the cells on the left side of the battery, cells number 5 through 8. This CT scan of the battery shows that the cells on the left side, again, cells 5 through 8, experienced significant mechanical damage. Note the deformation of the cells and the bulging of the individual cells. The team has carefully considered mechanical and thermal damage and the sequence of the cell failures. The body of evidence strongly suggests that the event initiated in cell number 6, highlighted in red on this slide. Cell number 6 has multiple signs of short circuiting, which resulted in thermal runaway in this cell. The thermal runaway then cascaded to other cells in the battery, as is evidenced by the damage to those adjacent cells. And that resulted in the fire. This hot spot that you see in the photograph is one of the internal short circuits that we've identified in cell number 6. We are now working to determine the cause of the short circuiting, or identify the cause of the short circuiting in cell number 6. At this time, we've been able to rule out 2 possible causes. We have ruled out mechanical impact damage to the battery. All mechanical damage to the cells and the battery case occurred after the initiating event, the short circuiting in cell number 6. And we have also ruled out external short circuiting of the cells or battery. External arc damage from contact between a cell and the battery case itself, that's highlighted in red in this photo, and in a close-up view that's in the photo on the right, has been identified as occurring from inside of the battery and only after the cell has experienced significant expansion. So we are still considering several potential causes for the short circuiting in cell number 6. They include the following: looking at the state of charge of each individual cell and the method and delivery of that charge. We are looking for evidence of contamination, of electrofolds, wrinkles, and pinches in the assembly of the cells and the battery. And because the 787 battery is really a collection of 8 individual cells packaged together in a box, we're looking at the total design of the battery, including the physical separation of the cells, their electrical interconnections, and their thermal isolation from each other. So moving on to the second part that we talked about, 2 tracks of our investigation, the battery itself in our lab and the certification process. We're moving to the certification process now. Because of the unexpected nature of the battery failure, our investigators began reviewing the certification of the 787 battery design. I know you're all aware that the Department of Transportation announced on January 11th that the FAA would conduct a comprehensive review of the 787 critical systems, including the design, manufacture, and assembly. So let's talk about what type certification is. Type certification is a regulatory process that the FAA uses to ensure that the design of a transport category airplane meets applicable safety standards. Safety standards are embodied in federal aviation regulations, and they have associated guidance that goes along with that. But unlike an engineering design that must balance possibly conflicting safety, cost, schedule, performance, aesthetic, and manufacturing elements of design, certification focuses solely on safety to ensure that it meets minimum standards. Because the 787 incorporated a number of what the FAA calls novel or unusual design features, the applicable airworthiness regulations at the time did not address those new features. So as a result, in 2007, the FAA issued 9 special conditions for the 787 with regard to the use of lithium-ion batteries. These special conditions contained additional safety requirements that the FAA deemed necessary to ensure an equivalent level of safety. We do have copies of those special conditions here and on our website, but of particular interest to our investigators is understanding how these special conditions relate to the failure modes and the outcome that we saw in this event, smoke and fire. Our investigators found that during the certification process, Boeing studied possible failures that could occur within the battery. They, number one, assessed the likelihood of the failure occurring, and 2, they assessed the effects that that failure would have on the battery. To do this, various tests were performed on the battery cells. One test was characterized as abusive, and it was intended to short-circuit the cell, induce short-circuiting and cell venting. Boeing has indicated that these tests that were conducted prior to certification showed no evidence of cell-to-cell propagation or fire in the battery. However, our investigative findings with respect to the event battery show that when a short circuit did occur, it resulted in cell-to-cell propagation in a cascading manner and a fire. Another condition considered by Boeing during certification was whether a failure that resulted in a single cell venting through its ruptured disk would create smoke emission from the battery. Boeing assessed that the likelihood of a smoke emission event from a 787 battery would occur less than once in every 10 million flight hours. The 787 fleet has accumulated less than 100,000 flight hours. Yet there have now been 2 battery events resulting in smoke less than 2 weeks apart on 2 different aircraft. This investigation has demonstrated that a short circuit in a single cell can propagate to adjacent cells and result in smoke and fire. The assumptions used to certify the battery must be reconsidered. As we move forward, we will begin testing of some of the batteries that have been removed from the 787 fleet from the field. The NTSB will also examine the safety certification process used by both the FAA and Boeing for the 787 battery design and determine why the hazards identified in this investigation were not mitigated. This will include a review of the actions taken to comply with the FAA's special conditions and any other requirements pertinent to the battery. The NTSB has been sharing all of our findings with the FAA, Boeing, JTSB, our Japanese counterparts, and BEA, our French counterparts, because we know that that information is critical to the decisions that must be made, that are being made in real time, about how to return the 787 fleet to flight. In addition, we will open our public docket and we will issue an interim factual report within 30 days. Let me be clear, though, the decision to return the 787 to flight will be made by the FAA, not the NTSB. I'd be pleased to answer your questions. Yes?
Patrick Terpstra, Highway 7 Seattle. How unusual is that for your engineers to find a different outcome than what Boeing would have found during pre-flight tests?
The question is how unusual is it for our engineers to find a different outcome than what Boeing may have identified in their pre-flight testing for certification. The NTSB has investigated a number of accidents in our 46-year history, and so we do have a lot of experience with looking back. We actually published a special report on airplane certification in 2006, and in that report we did identify some of the certification issues that we are concerned about, whether or not adequate assessments or worst-case scenario assessments were made in the certification process, whether or not in-fleet experience was incorporated back, and so that the engineering as well as the maintenance processes were all part of ongoing safety of that airplane throughout its life. And so we did look at 4 accident investigations in that report: 427, TWA 800, 587, and Alaska Air. And so we did identify some issues there. This is something that we look at as part of the work that we do. And so it's not unusual for us to find that some of those assumptions were not borne out in fleet experience.
And just to follow up on that, should the public be worried then about other parts of the 787, given that this is such the plane of tomorrow, that if it is allowed to fly again, we might see other potentially catastrophic issues that were overlooked?
The question is, as we are finding concerns about the assumptions made with respect to the battery, are we concerned about any of the other aircraft systems or parts? And I will tell you, I think that that is certainly something that the FAA initiated their review of the certification process. They did that prior to the second event involving the A&A aircraft. They initiated that certification review, which is a very serious step prior to grounding the fleet. And so the NTSB is looking at this event. We are investigating what occurred at Logan on the JAL aircraft. It will be really up to others to look at other things, but if we learn lessons that we think are applicable in other scenarios, we will be sure to pass those on. Yes, ma'am.
Just yesterday, the FAA issued a one-time special flight permit for the Dreamliner. I'm just wondering, given your review findings today, if the NTSB thinks that flight is safe.
The question is, yesterday the FAA issued a one-time flight permit to ferry an aircraft, and does the NTSB have concerns about whether or not that is safe? The FAA is conducting risk assessments. They will make the decisions about return to flight. This was a ferry permit to reposition an aircraft that had not yet been delivered to a customer back to Everett. Sure, and I know we have some people on the line. Do we have some questions queued up there? I'll come back to you when you get those. Next question from the audience.
Aaron Karp with your transport board. You said that the assumptions used to certify the battery must be reconsidered. What particular assumptions do you think were overlooked or mistaken?
The question is the statement, the assumptions made about the battery with respect to certification must be reconsidered. There are 9 special conditions. There are 9 factors that they need to take a look at in the special conditions for the battery. And what we have seen is, with respect to a number of those special conditions, and also the assumption that they would not have a smoke event but less than once every 10 million flight hours, that we have not seen that in the fleet performance. We have seen 2 events on 2 aircraft less than 2 weeks apart. And so we know that some of the assumptions that were made to make sure that they didn't have a smoke event were not met, much less a fire event. Yes, Mike?
Mike Honors with CNN. I believe your wording was that during the certification process, Boeing studied possible failure modes. During this process, what was the FAA's role, and was there any independent validation of Boeing's certification?
Sure. Mike's question was that Boeing conducted some testing in the certification activities, and what was Boeing's role and what was the FAA's role with respect to that type of verification. Is that correct, Mike? So when these tests were conducted, this is not unusual. Boeing was conducting tests, and we have mentioned.
Do you want me to drop this? Yeah, just drop it.
Yeah.
Still on. You can't get to mute.
We'll recall them. Mike, I think going back to your question before we got on call waiting there, we have looked at the certification process. It is not unusual to see an operator conducting testing. We are looking at that. Obviously, Boeing is the overall manufacturer, but we also have Thales is the integrator, and GS Yuasa that has manufactured the battery. There are a number of different tests that are conducted at a lot of different levels on component parts, on systems. Those tests that were conducted by Boeing prior to certification included things like nail tests, impact tests. They have done those. We're taking a look at that. We're taking a look at the assumptions. We're taking a look at the results. We want to understand what was different in the testing that they did then, what happened in service, and what's different about some of the tests that are being conducted now, post-event, to look at the battery and also look at potential failure modes in the battery and abuse of the battery. So all of those tests are ongoing, and we will be comparing those and trying to work to understand it. Again, it's gathering a lot of records of what was done 6 years ago.
Madam Chairman, yesterday you said that investigators were weeks away from finding a root cause of the faulty batteries. What makes you so sure that you can find a root cause within just weeks and perhaps not months or longer?
Well, in a few weeks, we will be issuing our interim factual report, and that will actually contain the work that our team has done to date. But, you know, we do have a long road ahead of us, and it really depends on where the evidence leads us. One of the challenges in a fire, in any fire, is very often the very best evidence is consumed by the fire. And so there are some challenges with doing fire investigations. I do have a lot of confidence in our team and that the progress that they have made to date. They have been able to identify failures. They've been able to identify telltale features that tell us where things originated. They've identified the origin of this event and how it cascaded, and they've been able to rule some things out. And so they are proceeding with their work very methodically, and I think through the testing that they're doing, not just of the battery involved in the event, but of exemplar batteries, will be able to help them identify the most likely failure modes. In the back?
Is there anything about cell number 6 that could help in your investigation? Cell number 6 unique anyway, does it operate at any particular point? Does it tell you anything in the technical investigation? And on your note about Yuasa and Thales, is it fair to say that it's possible that they would have been responsible for that initial testing and talked about propagation of smoke and not Boeing?
Okay, you've got a couple questions there. So let me try to answer the first one first. Your question is battery, is cell 6 in the battery unique? The answer is these are 6 cells that are chained together. I'm sorry, 8 cells, cell 6. Thank you, John. We've got 8 cells that are chained together. This is cell number 6. All of the cells are designed the same. and to the same standards and specifications. What we need to understand, again, as we mentioned, the failure modes that we are looking at, we need to understand if there was something that was unique or different about cell 6 that made it susceptible to failure. But all 8 of these cells are of the same design, so it's not unique. Your second question was about testing and whether or not it wasn't just Boeing, but Thales and GSU ASA that might have been responsible for doing some of the testing for certification.
With Boeing certifying their
Yes. So again, this is not unusual. You've got different component parts on aircraft manufactured by different manufacturers. You've got landing gear, you've got tires, you've got avionics. They are not all from the same manufacturer. And so you've got different suppliers and different contractors and subcontractors. We need to understand what tests were done and who was certifying those tests, and again, how they were verified, not just by Boeing, but by the regulator as well. So that will be a part of our ongoing investigation. In the back?
You mentioned that NTSB will issue interim functional report in 30 days. So it means that it's not conclusion and the investigation made.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. That is a great question. What does it mean for the NTSB to issue an interim factual report? Will that be the conclusion of the investigation, or will the investigation continue? The interim factual report is really going to be factual information. And so as we've gone through this investigation, we've worked very hard to share factual information with you. What we are going to be doing in the interim factual report is really bundling a lot of information that our investigators have been working on over this past month and in advance moving forward in the next 30 days. They will put together a comprehensive factual report that will have a lot of details in it about the lab work, about the exam, about the certification process. I don't expect that to be reaching a conclusion for the investigation. It will have some additional information, but we understand that it's very important in this investigation, particularly when this fleet is grounded, for us to continue to provide information as we go and not hold it until we can reach the end of the investigation. And so this is not the final report. It is an interim factual. Mike?
By saying that you've identified the origin of the event inside the battery, that's not saying that you've exonerated things external to the battery as being perhaps the root cause, or is it?
The question is, we've identified cell 6 as the origin of the event, but does that rule out anything external to the battery as potentially being the root cause? As I mentioned, we are pursuing a number of different paths as far as following this investigation out. There are 3 different areas that we're taking a look at, and one of those areas is battery charging. And what we want to understand is how the battery is charged, how each of the cells are charged, what type of charge that they're receiving, how that's monitored. And so we are still looking at some things that actually may come from external to the battery. That doesn't mean that we've identified those as the cause. It just means we have not yet ruled those things out. And so we will continue to move forward. We're looking at the design of the battery as well. We talked about these as being really 8 separate units that are chained together, and looking at how that design works and whether safeguards are in place there. And we also are looking at the manufacturing process. So really, design, certification, manufacturing, these are all still on the table, and we have a lot of work to do. Do we have?
So this battery, as I understand it, has a containment system, that there's some kind of fireproof box around the battery in case there is a fire. So have you found any problems with that? Did that system work as it was designed to? And could a plane like this possibly fly safely if there's a battery fire?
The question is have we reached any conclusions about the effectiveness of the casing, the box, and the second piece of that was whether
Could a plane fly safely even if there is
whether a plane could fly safely even when there is a battery fire. You're asking me to get into analysis, and at this point, we really are sharing factual information. We are documenting the performance of the box. We did see some post-event damage to the box. And that all followed the initiation of that short circuit that propagated throughout the battery. But we are still evaluating the performance, and I think that there is a lot of testing that's going on to determine how protective the structure is, that box is. And so I think there's still some work to be done there.
Madam Chairman, as far as you know, how does your preliminary finding about the single cell that may have been the origin of the incident mesh with what Japanese investigators have found?
The question is, how is our investigation with the pinpointing the origin in cell 6 meshing with the work that the JTSB and the Japanese investigators are doing in the ANA event? We are working very closely with our Japanese counterparts. In fact, we have 2 shifts of employees working here in the U.S. to maintain relationships with our Japanese counterparts due to the time difference. And in fact, we have investigators from aviation safety as well as from our lab also in Japan working with the Japanese team. Remember, their event did occur after our event. They provided a press briefing a couple of days ago about their activities, and we are continuing to work very closely. But our investigation, we've had a little bit more time to work these issues, and so we continue to coordinate with them and share information. I don't think we're in a position to do a comparative analysis at this point in time. Yes?
Which coordination have you had with Boeing, and have they proposed any changes or upgrades to the battery?
The question is, how much coordination have we had with Boeing, and have they proposed any changes to the battery? The NTSB is working very closely with the parties to our investigation, the Federal Aviation Administration, Boeing, and as I've mentioned, our French and Japanese counterparts and their technical advisors. If Boeing is proposing any changes to the battery, those will be proposed to the Federal Aviation Administration, not necessarily to the NTSB. We do not certify the aircraft, and we do not determine whether it returns to flight. We are investigating this event, trying to determine what happened in this event, and provide that information to people to make the right decisions about next steps. Yes, Kathy?
I just want to make sure I understand what you laid out as a chain of events. If this is the correct understanding.
Sure.
So there was a short circuit in one of the cells that spread to the other cells, but you don't know the origin of the short circuit.
Sorry, just 1 second. No, I don't think this is plugged in. You can probably just take it with you. Okay. Kathy, I'm sorry. Can you just
Yes, so I want to make sure if you tell me if this boiled down understanding is correct. There was a short circuit in one of the cells that spread to the other cells, but you don't know the origin of the short circuit.
Yes. Kathy's question has to do with what we know and the sequence of the events. We have pinpointed the origin of the event to cell number 6. We know cell number 6 had multiple short circuits, and so we've identified the initiating event as a short circuit in cell number 6. Cell number 6 then got into a thermal runaway condition, and it propagated to the other adjacent cells surrounding cell number 6. Ultimately, what the JAL mechanic reported was seeing fire coming from the battery. And so we've identified those basic facts. We're continuing to work to drill down a little bit more. Does that get you what you need? Okay. And we'll go to the phone. I'm sorry, we were having trouble earlier. Do we have questions queued up? Okay, we'll come back to the audience. Yes.
During the last briefing, it wasn't clear whether there was the thermal runaway first or the short circuit first. Now that we know that it's the short circuit first, does that suggest anything about what the cause was? Or you mentioned you're looking at least contamination or a couple of other things.
Sure. Bart's question has to do with what we know now versus what we were able to share with you a couple of weeks ago. And yes, we do know that the short circuit came first. The thermal runaway followed in cell number 6, and it propagated to the other cells. That does help us as we begin what may have caused it. And yes, we are looking at a number of different scenarios. As I mentioned, we are looking at the state of charge of the battery cells. We are looking at manufacturing processes, and we are looking at design of the battery. And obviously, certification is over all of those issues. Yes, ma'am.
Renee Marsh with CNN. With your intense focus on the design of the battery, manufacturing, I'm wondering, do you all feel a bit of discomfort that the battery maker continues to produce batteries?
The question is, with our design, with our focus on the design and the manufacture of the battery, do we have concerns about continued battery production? I have to say, we have not reached any conclusions at this point. We really still have a lot of work to do. If and when we identify a defect, we identify a failure, we identify a process issue, we will raise those. We will raise those in these public opportunities that we have to share the information. But also, you need to know that as part of our investigation, the battery manufacturer is in the lab with our team. GS-UASA is a party to our investigation. So anything they are learning as part of this investigation, they can feed back into their processes to make improvements. Anyone who hasn't asked a question yet?
Yeah, understanding what you said about the FAA's role in regulation and returning to flight, there's been some suggestions that a battery fix that would include separation in the cells in the battery to reduce smoking fire and kind of thermal runaway, as well as placing heat sensors and adding more rigidity could provide perhaps even at least an interim
And we
solution.
do have a question.
Understand that
Dominic
you know
Seattle
already,
Times.
how would you react to that type of fix in battery?
Just 1 minute.
Actually, we moved on now to Jason Carr with Wired Magazine.
Just 1 minute on the phone. We're not quite ready for you yet. Sorry, could you restate your question succinctly, and I'll try to answer it.
There's been suggestion that making of battery modifications, such as the spacing between the cells, adding rigidity into the battery, and putting heat sensors could at least be an interim solution. Understand that the FAA has the role of making a decision to return to flight. What would be NTSB's reaction to that type of fix, given what you know?
The question has to do with different mitigation measures that might be taken within the battery to return it to flight. That is the FAA's purview, and I will leave questions about that, those questions to them. They will decide what mitigation measures are effective and assure them of the safety of the aircraft to return it to flight. We have a question from the phone from Wired. Go.
Wired Magazine, and I was curious, with the investigation of the short circuit in battery cells, is there any indication of where the short circuit may have occurred? Was it between a separator? Was it between the coils themselves?
No. Thank you for the question from Wired. They're asking exactly where the short circuit may have occurred within the battery, and we do not have that specific information, but I will tell you that our team is continuing to document information in the lab, and they will be producing a detailed factual report. And again, I mentioned that we're planning to put that out in 30 days. And so you can look for some additional details of the features that we identified at that time. Another question from the phone? Okay, no other questions from the phone?
We do have a question now from Brendan Curie with Post and Courier.
Hi, thank you. Just very basically, what would have happened if this battery failure happened while the plane was in the air?
The question is, what would have happened if this battery failure occurred while the plane was in the air? The NTSB is really focused on providing factual information, and so you're asking for some analysis, but I will refer you to the JTSB's investigation of the ANA event. They did have a battery event that occurred in the air. The crew landed the airplane at Takamatsu, and that investigation is also ongoing. And if you would like an update on that, I will refer you to the JTSB.
Okay, and one other, it sounds like the issue is in the battery, so it's a manufacturing issue with the battery. It doesn't have anything to do with installation of the electrical system. Is that correct?
The question is how we have stated what we've identified. I think we have left a lot of issues on the table that we are looking at. We have not pinpointed. I think the caller tried to identify that it was a manufacturing issue. That is not correct. We have not yet identified what the cause of the short circuit is. We are looking at the design of the battery. We are looking at the manufacturing process. And we are also looking at the cell charging. And that involves the charging that's coming from outside of the battery, how each individual cell's charge, how that's managed, and how it's evaluated. So, and how those charges come in. So that, just to be very clear, there are a lot of things that we are still looking at, and those are the things that we're focused on right now. Thank you. Thank you all very much. We'll continue to provide additional factual updates in the coming days and weeks. Have a good day.